Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts. We'll break down the verdict from every conceivable angle. Meanwhile, every other case against him seems to be on ice. And while Trump lashes out, Biden has put his head down, pushing for peace in the Middle East and solutions to the border crisis. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54. I'm Ravi Gupta, and I am welcomed by my friend Hari Sevugan, who is a former senior spokesperson for President Obama and deputy campaign manager for Mayor Pete Buttigieg, among many other things. Hari, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ravi.
Well, slow news week, man. Slow news week.
I can't believe you almost forgot one of the charges there. It's 34.
Trump, it's hard to say where to start with this and, you know, what hasn't been said already. But let's actually turn the clock back to 2016. Let's go to the, then candidate Trump just days before the election.
Tell you what, for what she's done, they should lock her up. She's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. Hillary Clinton has to go to jail, okay? She has to go to jail. You should lock them up. Lock up the Bidens. Lock up Hillary.
Yeah, so, Trump has been doing interviews claiming that he never said lock her up. And Hari, it seems like he may have said it a couple of times.
Yeah, I think the thing with Trump is like he's kind of got this reputation as like Teflon Don, right? Like where nothing sticks to him. And it's not just, attacks against him by outsiders. It's attacks that he has levied himself. Like none of that. I don't think any of that's going to really matter, that he said this stuff in the past. Like no one in the Republican Party and seemingly no one in the press is going to hold him accountable for that particular piece of hypocrisy. And I don't think voters generally, unless someone has got a reputation for being sort of a flip-flopper like Kerry or something like that, will hold someone accountable for hypocrisy. I do think that there's a broader conversation around these convictions that voters will be moved by, that would be very smart to, Democrats would be very smart to engage with.
Yeah, let's play another clip here where, before we I don't want to move past the hypocrisy too fast here. Let's play one more clip in which Trump was warning ahead of the 2016 elections what would happen if, somebody who was under threat of legal action were to become president of the United States.
If she were to win this election, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In that situation, we could very well have a sitting president under felony indictment and ultimately a criminal trial. It would grind government to a halt.
So there's been a lot of talk of Hillary here, Hari, over the past few days. I imagine she's probably, sitting, somewhere in Westchester, just saying, leave me out of this. But Trump also, so that was before 2016. Obviously, if I don't know if you were sitting in a super PAC, whether you would want to put any money behind an ad reminding voters of that point. But he has also said that, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll dust off that playbook and start talking about Hillary again. And then we'll play one more clip here, and then I think we leave the hypocrisy point alone here. Let's go to this one.
Yeah.
Mother Teresa couldn't get a fair trial here. I said that. And no, you couldn't. I never saw a glimmer of a smile from the jury. It was a trial that everybody said shouldn't have been brought, including Bragg didn't want to bring it. Nobody wanted to bring it until I decided to run, and then was beating everybody by a lot, and then was beating Biden by a lot in the polls. But, it's a very terrible thing. It's a terrible precedent for our country. Does that mean the next president does it to them? That's really the question. Wouldn't it be terrible to throw the president's wife, and the former Secretary of State. Think of it, the former Secretary of State, but the president's wife into jail. Wouldn't that be a terrible thing? But they want to do it. So, it's a terrible, terrible path that they're leading us to. And it's very possible that it's going to have to happen to them.
I'll put aside like the strange language here around the president's wife. I'm not sure what's going on there, but
poor Jill caught astray.
So I think I'm of two minds when it comes to this hypocrisy stuff, in part because he's trying to make this now about, his persecution complex. He raised a ton of money. Some people think he might have completely erased Biden's cash advantage by the time, this fundraising campaign is over this case. So his narrative is that he's being persecuted, right? And so I'm of two minds here. One is just pivot to the issues that matter and let him flail, and also let him, as we'll get to, do serious damage to his chances at sentencing, or hammer this home that this guy has a record now and that he had previously gone after his opponent, saying that he was going to prosecute her, throw her in jail, and that he used language that, if used against him, would be very inconvenient. Where do you come down on this?
I think we need to be aggressive in framing the conviction. And I think we need to be relentless in doing it. I don't think that the hypocrisy angle is the way to do it, using sort of his, his statements about Hillary in 2016 or the Bidens in 2020. I think that second clip that you played might be a more interesting argument to posit with voters, which is, how does this affect them ultimately, right? Like if the chief executive of the country is unable to function because he is under indictment or on trial with a criminal conviction hanging over them, that will affect how effective they can be in getting things done for the country, right? And that to me is much more effective than, this is what Don used to say, and now he's saying something else. Like, I think that is kind of baked into voters' minds, right? And isn't going to be super persuasive. But this notion that he's going to be preoccupied by this, that he's not going to have the credibility to move stuff along, that his focus is going to be on seeking revenge. All of those things ultimately can yield or lead to a road at the end of the argument to say, well, that's going to hurt you. That is going to hurt the voter. And I think that's a much stronger argument. And I do think we need to be very, very aggressive. There was Celinda Lake was talking about some research that she'd done, some focus groups that she'd done recently about the convictions. And she noticed that the Republican base is very motivated by this, much more so than the Democratic base. And so to me, that speaks to the idea that we really, this isn't just about persuadable voters, but also our base and energizing them. We need to get out ahead of framing this conviction. And I think we need to be very strong in the language we use. He's not just a convict or a felon. There needs to be consequences to that. And the consequences are that it disqualifies him. Like, the ultimate judgment is not going to be the judgment of the voters. Like, I think we've got to say, this disqualifies this guy from being president of the United States. He will be unable to do the job and get the stuff done that the American people need to get done.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, Americans have a certain view of this country. Like, the idea that we would put somebody in office who is now a convicted felon, I think people have major questions about this. And Biden was pretty measured at first, but he recently came out with a quote that says the following. He said, "For the first time in American history, a former president that is a convicted felon is now seeking the office of the presidency. But as disturbing as that is, more damaging is the all-out assault Donald Trump is making on the American system of justice." So kind of broadening it out. A question for you, you are a lawyer, sort of, just like I am, sort of. Don't fact check that. What do you think happens? His sentencing is in a few weeks. Have you gone through this literature? and have you gone down this rabbit hole like I have? And where do you come out, like, in thinking about his probability of, before we get to like whether he'll serve that time and when, but whether in this sentencing he will be sentenced to prison time?
I don't know New York law, enough to answer that question with any kind of certainty. My guess is no, right? He's a first-time offender. There was a New York Times story a while back that looked at and kind of surveyed falsifying business records.
Yeah, there's this Norm Ising's
and
article. Yeah.
Norm Ising's article, yeah. There's some good stuff in there, about how regular these charges are and that kind of thing, how commonplace they are. But also, he looked at the sentencing for those that were convicted on those charges, and only like 10% got a custodial sentence, right, for major stuff, including some first-time offenders. That said, like I cannot see him getting a custodial sentence on this, based on those percentages, and based on what we've seen from the judge in the past. He violated the gag order so many times, and the judge did not hold him in contempt in a way that would put him into custody. So I would be surprised if he did. And beyond that, there's the appeals process, right, which could take forever.
Yeah, it looks like 1 in 10 people get some kind of sentence, right? Now, it cuts in different ways, right? This is a first-time offender, but he's got multiple indictments simultaneous to this. But I think most importantly is his conduct during this trial and after the trial. So if he sees prison time, it will be because of that. And you ask yourself, what would happen to you or I if we behaved this way, even with the 1 to 10 odds, right? We attacked the judge, we attacked the judge's daughter. We showed no contrition at any point, violated the gag order multiple times. He turned around at a point where in almost every criminal case you could ever imagine, once the guilty verdict goes down, you immediately pivot. We saw this with Sam Bankman-Fried. You see it with Elizabeth Holmes. Immediately after the guilty verdict, you pivot, you apologize, you own up to what you did. You don't pretend like you didn't do it anymore. You certainly don't attack the witnesses, the judge, the jury, right? So you got to imagine that that's going to weigh in some way here. And, there are multiple layers of this, right? There's the judge who ultimately makes the determination, but before it gets to him, there is going to be a probation officer who is going to sit down with Donald Trump and have to write a report. That report, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is going to go to the prosecutor. The prosecutor then will also recommend a sentence to the judge. The judge will weigh that report and the prosecution's recommendation and issue the sentence. He doesn't have to abide by the report, but you can imagine that the report will make a huge difference, because although that report is confidential, Trump's team can do whatever they want with it. They're the one party who can actually leak it. So if that report does not recommend prison time, I think we can pretty much guarantee there's going to be no prison time, because I think the judge would look terrible if he broke with the recommendation of the report.
Yeah. Well, I think there's the probation report, which is going to be confidential. And what I think we've seen from Trump in the past is, in private or in less public settings, he isn't as he isn't on stage, right? He's not performing. And he's actually kind of quiet and almost meek at times. And so I can imagine in a private conversation with a probation officer, him being pretty compliant. I don't know if he'll go so far as to apologize or show remorse, but I don't think he will be demonstrative in any way, which I think is very different from what his defense was at trial, which was not about, it wasn't a legal strategy, it was a political strategy, right? Which is, I think, part of the problem that he ended up with is that he was playing to the coverage and to his voters more than he was to the jury. So, I can't see him doing any kind of allocution at any point. But I still don't know if that he's going to end up with prison time. Even if he did get a sentence, like this appeals process is going to take him quite a while, and for someone with sort of his cholesterol level, like I don't think you will see the end of that appeal process.
Yeah, well, the GOP is rabid about this. We talked about the donations that poured in for Trump, but also certain, the sort of who you could expect on the right. Everybody from U.S. senators to former Trump officials have been frothing. And Stephen Miller in particular had some pointed comments when he went on, I think it was Buck Sexton or somebody like that. Let's go to this clip.
When you have a radical left bent on demolishing and bulldozing and pulverizing you, and the opposing force believes that their highest virtue is to avoid conflict at all costs, this is a very predictable end, and it's called the end of a free society. If you're not as aggressive in defending a free society as the radical left is in demolishing a free society, then you will live in tyranny. And so my answer is that Republican DAs and Republican AGs need to absolutely be pursuing valid criminal charges against valid targets for true and actual crimes that are being perpetrated against this country on a daily basis. You have illegal censorship, you have illegal spying, you have illegal human trafficking, you have financial fraud, you have financial crime. You have so many targets that you could be going after. Again, the difference is these aren't hoaxes.
So do you think we'll see in the next few months charges like this coming out? And we may already have them, right? We're going to talk a little bit later, Hunter Biden, which, it's not, I wouldn't say that's a GOP-led prosecution, but I would say it is the GOP pressure seems to be having an effect. I'm not sure we'd be where we are if not for that pressure.
Yeah. With the failed plea deal, it was certainly an indication of pressure, right? Like political pressure that impacted sort of the legal outcome there. I do wonder if this is, I suspect we will see some of this stuff, right? Like deep in Alabama somewhere, there may be a DA who's preparing a case. The check, to the degree that we have these checks, is, and I think we saw this in even in this case, are these juries, and ultimately the appeals process. Juries take their job really seriously. I wasn't a lawyer for very long, but while I was a lawyer, we did essentially a bunch of mock trials. I wasn't long enough to actually get to trial. I wasn't a lawyer long enough to actually get to trial, but we did do some mock trials of cases that we were engaged in, and we would hire juries. We'd hire jurors to give us their feedback on. It's essentially a focus group, right, on what our trial strategy would be. And we would put cameras in the jury room and listen to their deliberations and stuff, and then get feedback afterwards. And they take their job, even for like fake trials like that we were doing. They take those jobs really, 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 really seriously. And in this case, we saw the same thing. Like, the questions that the jury asked of the judge were really about applying the law. Like, how do we apply the law to the facts that we have determined were produced at trial? And they over and over again wanted to know exactly what their duty was and exactly what rules they had to abide by. And I think that's true of most juries. And so, maybe we do see some of this stuff that's more politically motivated. I do think that there are checks built into the system that ultimately will, hopefully, will be the sort of balance.
Yeah, Steve Bannon said there are dozens of ambitious backbencher state attorneys general and district attorneys who will need to seize the day and own this moment in history. Marco Rubio kind of stepped up to the line too. So this isn't just the so-called fringe, right? This has become the mainstream position of the Republican Party. So we'll see. And, Speaker Johnson said he's basically going to lead an investigation into the Department of Justice, which I'm not exactly sure what that has to do with this case. So there's a lot going on here.
If I were Democrats, though, go ahead.
Oh, what were we going to say?
I say if I was Democrats, I would jump on that stuff, right? Like that letter that Rubio and a bunch of other senators signed, essentially saying that they were going to grind the work of the Senate to a halt, until the injustice of this verdict was somehow rectified, is gold. I mean, if you're a political operative on the Democratic side, like that's, you start putting together, like if you're Schumer's office, start putting together really important work, like really important votes. Military defense authorization, veterans authorization, put that stuff on the floor and make those guys say no, right? Like, I mean, they're going to grind the business of the American people to a halt to defend Donald Trump. Like, that's our strongest argument in all of this is like, this is all about Trump. They're all about Trump and working for him. And while they're doing that, they're screwing you, right? And so I would make that case as clear as day, as many times as I can.
Yeah. Well, one final piece here, and the audience is going to hate this, but I feel like I have to mention it, is Eli Honig, the former prosecutor, went on, he's been on TV kind of criticizing this case, and he wrote a piece in New York Magazine that I thought was really interesting. He said prosecutors got Trump, but they contorted the law. And I think this is worth mentioning because he's not, some right-wing lunatic. He's a pretty reasonable guy. He made a couple of points. He said, number one, he felt like the jury did the right thing, but there was some prosecution issues here and some issues with the judge. As it relates to the judge, he said that the judge donated $35 to a pro-Biden anti-Trump political operation that was pretty explicitly anti-Trump, and that it's against the sort of internal code, but also common sense to sort of preside over a case like this. And he said, well, if it were the other way around, how would you feel? And he kind of compares it to things like the Alito case. So that was the first point he made. I think the second point he made is that no state prosecutor has ever charged federal election laws as a predicate to state crimes. And he basically talked about how this was, and that seemed, in his words, to be a bespoke case against Trump. I'm curious, as somebody who's spent a lot of time thinking about the law, how you feel about his arguments.
I get it. I understand the case to be made, and I think it's important to think through prosecutorial discretion. Like, prosecutorial discretion is a underutilized tool in our justice system. I think in this case, though, it doesn't quite apply. One, the underlying case, so really this case is almost two parts, right? The prosecution had to show two things. One, they had to get unanimity from the jury on the underlying crime, which is the falsifying business records. And the second part is that they had to show that it was in furtherance of some other crime, and they didn't have to have unanimity in what that crime was, but it had to be some other crime, including this idea of more or less fraud in advancing a candidacy, in this case, a federal candidacy. The underlying crime, the falsifying business records, is a very commonplace thing. The prosecutor's office has said it's their bread and butter. The New York Times story by Eisen that we've been talking to went back and looked at cases from, I think, 2015, and it was 10,000 cases of that the DA's office has brought in the last 9 years. 10,000 cases. This is a very normal thing for them to bring. The idea that it was applied in a way that is novel is indisputable, right? Like, this is the first time that it's been applied in a way where the secondary crime here, the furtherance, is the furtherance of the pursuit of the presidency, right? But it's because Trump himself is novel. Like, this is the first time that we've had a presidential candidate, sleep with a porn star, pay hush money to the porn star to cover it up to win the presidency, right? Like, that is an unprecedented thing. So of course it is going to be unprecedented in how what the falsifying the business records were in furtherance of. So I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning. That said, I probably, if I was the judge, I would have recused myself. Like
Same.
the appearance
Yeah.
of impropriety is enough, right?
Yeah.
Which is this, like Alito should do the same thing, even though you
For
probably
sure.
shouldn't be
For sure.
responsible for his wife. But it's not that you are biased or even evidence that you're biased. It is an appearance of impropriety, right? And so or lack of impartiality rather, and that's enough. And so would I have preferred that? Yes.
Well, we're going to take a break and hear from some of our sponsors. Our first ad up is going to be for this new podcast I have with Crooked Media called Killing Justice. It couldn't come at a better time. We've got some shock results coming out of India, which is something we're going to be covering in that series, among other things. And we've shot to the top of the true crime rankings. And so you could help us shoot even further if you haven't listened to it yet. Make sure to get on wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe. So we will be back, and we've got a lot to talk about. We've got this immigration announcement from Biden. We've got some political stuff happening, and we also have the Hunter Biden trial to talk about all that and more when we come back. My name is Ravi Gupta. I'm Indian American, emphasis on American. I was raised by my Polish mom in Staten Island, don't speak any Indian languages, and I've eaten less Indian food than most white people. For most of my life, understanding the country my family came from was low on my to-do list. That is, until I began following a mystery.
This looks like a Bollywood script.
I haven't heard a crystal clear theory as to what happened that night. The story centered around the suspicious death of a high-level judge in India.
There were some very intense questions that Judge Loya's death left behind.
There was no investigation.
There's a possibility of poisoning, and there's trauma applied to this person's head.
Was Judge Loya not a part of the judiciary? Was Judge Loya not a part of the system?
Judge was set to rule in a major case that involved some of India's most powerful political figures.
It's possible that he was under pressure. Nobody denies that.
You can imagine, right, that it's never happened before in India that the Home Minister of a state has been investigated by the CBI at the direction of the Supreme Court of India, right?
When I finally went to India myself to try to understand what had happened, I found a lot more questions than answers. I was just getting a very hostile vibe from the get-go. There was like a gaggle of men in front who were asking me a lot of questions about what I was after.
He would not answer questions.
Yeah.
He would just not answer questions.
I was drawn into the story for the mystery and the political intrigue. But as I followed the twists and turns over the past year, I've realized this is about more than just one judge's death. It's about the future of Indian democracy.
This clash, the clash between two ideas, two concepts of India.
Falsehood has become the hallmark of this government.
There is impunity. There's terrific impunity in India. Journalists are killed.
If this is not going to stop, 100 more people will die.
In this new series, I'll ask, is the world's largest democracy even a democracy anymore? If they're willing to kill all these powerful people, this is like a very crass thing to ask, but how are you still alive?
I don't know.
From Crooked Media and The Branch, this is Killing Justice, coming May 27th. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is sponsored by Rhone. If you're like me, you understand the pains of finding what to wear. Most clothes are uncomfortable. They may be too tight. They never, actually fit your size because, a lot of us are not exactly small, medium, large, extra large. We're complicated. Sometimes when you find something you like, you can only wear it for a few hours before that important meeting or dinner, and then you have to change it into something else. And everyone wants to dress their best. You want to look good at all times. And frankly, it's a confidence booster. So here's the deal. Men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man, and here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion with the commuter collection, which offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos. You never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone commuter collection. And here's some anecdote. I'm wearing my Rhone pants right now. And last week I was at a wedding. I wore my Rhone button-down shirt to the wedding at a formal wedding, and I will also wear it tomorrow when I just, go into a coffee shop to have a meeting. It's that versatile. So it's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. Yeah, I actually, not so neatly folded that shirt in my bag for the wedding, and I was able to take it out, and automatically I was able to put it on. It looked like I had ironed it, but I didn't. It's an inside secret between us. So with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll also be smelling fresh and clean all day. On top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can dish the dry cleaner all together. We're on the move a lot, and the Rhone Commuter Collection has never let me down. The versatility and overall comfort of the collection is undefeated. I absolutely love it. And even after I wear it all day, I feel super fresh because that Gold Fusion anti-odor technology. At that wedding, I was dancing up a storm, wore it, no problems. So the Commuter Collection can get you through any work day and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/majority and use the promo code majority to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/majority and use the code majority. It's time to find your corner office comfort. All right, Hari, just a couple of quick legal updates here. Generally good news for Trump. So the Georgia Court of Appeals has set oral arguments for October 4th over the effort to remove Fani Willis from the case. So we're not going to see that case anytime soon, certainly not before the election. Basically, the other cases are on hold. Aileen Cannon is, nobody's even commenting anymore on her. That she's essentially doing whatever she can to boot that case. And then obviously for Jack Smith, I mean, there is a chance that that case will be heard before the election, but only if there's a very clean verdict from the Supreme Court, essentially saying that there, is no immunity for Trump anywhere near this case. Whereas, most legal commentators suspect that what we'll get is a mixed verdict that will have, or a ruling from the Supreme Court that will say there's some immunity, some not. You have to determine it and do an evidentiary hearing or whatever, which is probably a backdoor way for some of these political operatives like Alito and Thomas to appear like they're even-handed while giving Trump exactly what he wants.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see. We're not going to see much of anything else in terms of adjudications, right? But I do think we'll get procedural updates, several of them in all of these cases between now and November 5th, and each of those cases each of those instances rather is another opportunity to remind voters about the choice and about what it means to them that this guy could be president, right? And what a not just a convicted felon, but also someone with ongoing criminal trials would mean in the presidency. And it's also all the more reason for Democrats to be really aggressive in framing this conviction and using it to set up all of these other procedural moments for the next 4 months, 5 months, because each of those is an opportunity to drive the same messaging home, but only if we lay the groundwork now.
Yeah. Well, in other news, Biden, we forget that he's also president of the United States. He issued executive orders on June 4th, so yesterday, aiming to restrict migrants from crossing the border. Let's go to this clip from Biden.
So today, I'm moving past Republican obstruction and using the executive authorities available to me as president to do what I can on my own to address the border. Frankly, I would have preferred to address this issue through bipartisan legislation because that's the only way to actually get the kind of system we have now that's broken, fixed, to hire more Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more judges. But Republicans have left me with no choice. Today, I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum. Migrants will be restricted from receiving asylum at our southern border unless they seek it after entering through an established lawful process.
So this essentially, I think, shuts down a pretty significant amount of crossings. So if the crossings surpass 2,500 a day, which they have pretty much every day of Biden's presidency, the ban would go into effect, and it wouldn't shut off until the Border Patrol has recorded 1,500 crossings a day for at least a week. The White House basically sees this as a ban that will take effect immediately. They exempt unaccompanied children, though children traveling with their parents will be subject to it. Trump side tried something similar. It was struck down by the courts, but the Biden team has enough carve-outs that they think this might survive. But Hari, I suspect this is half policy, half politics. So even if they get smacked down by the courts, they want to be seen trying.
Yeah, I think they're gonna. I think it's smart politics, and they're gonna have to consistently keep trying because I'm not sure about the legal case here. The ACLU has already threatened to sue, or actually may have already brought the suit under the same legal theory that struck down the Trump rules. So we'll see what the courts say about how the Biden administration is going to differentiate based on these exceptions and carve-outs or whatever. I do think that it's an important issue to take off the table for the president. The idea that that border security is a precondition for a lot of voters before they're able to make a choice is really important, because otherwise this is just a referendum. There are a few issues that inflation and immigration, I think, are sort of referendum issues on Biden, and that makes it a much more dicey proposition politically for him. The more that this is a choice election between Biden and Trump, it is a much better proposition if we aggressively frame that choice for voters. And so the way that you make it a choice election is to create a permission structure by removing some of these issues that would otherwise, or neutralizing some of these issues that would otherwise make it a referendum on the president. And this is, I think, a smart way to do it. But this is not just amongst swing voters. This is amongst Democrats. Democrats, softies. Definitely the softies that are college-educated suburban Democratic voters that maybe voted for President Biden in 2020, voted for a Democratic presidential candidate for the first time, feel pretty strongly about this as well. And it's, so this is, while there may be very loud voices in the base that would be disappointed or react negatively to this, I think this is going to be popular amongst a broad swath of the electorate, including our base, including portions of our base. So it's politically, I think it's a great move.
I think a lot of Republicans are viewing this as their equivalent of Dobbs, which I think obviously a lot of people listening are going to roll their eyes at that. But structurally, they're going at this in a way to try to rile up their base and delegitimize Biden with swing voters. A good example is in Arizona. They just passed this. They just announced that they're putting on the ballot a ballot measure to allow the state to basically enforce immigration laws. Say it's illegal to cross the border into Arizona, and the state would enforce that instead of the federal government, which in other states has been struck down, but obviously isn't really on the ballot because they want to follow through with it. It's on the ballot because they think it'll either remind people who are voting about the issue or motivate people who care about this issue to show up to the polls and just create a debate about it, right? Put Democrats on the record about this to say, all right, Biden, because Biden opposed it in other states, right? So to be like, okay, Biden doesn't want the state to be able to enforce its laws, right? That's what they want him to say. So, getting this out there is really important. And, there is a world where, if we get a strident, clear version of Biden, he can make this actually an asset because the Republicans tanked their own immigration bill because Trump didn't want Biden to have a win. And, I know there's a lot of cynicism, but I have to believe that if that were explained to the average swing voter, they would not like that fact.
Yeah, it's a lot to explain. I think that's the problem, especially in a 30-second ad, right? But it does, it's part of a drumbeat about Trump. right? And that the sort of the MAGA GOP is really about serving his best interests and not the best interests of the country. And so whether that is, about grinding the work of the Senate to a halt, to protest the verdicts, or not passing border security measures because Trump thinks it's a good election issue for them, it all leads to the same place. And that's part of this choice that we've got to present to folks, is that he's all about himself. This is a question of character in a lot of ways, and his character is all about himself. The president is about serving the country and serving the American people. And that's really, this is a great illustration of that if we do it right. And it becomes part of an echo of other instances of the same thing. But we've got to drill that home and carry that message explicitly through each and every one of those pieces.
Well, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Hunter Biden and everything going on there, among other things, when we come back.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, big and small, and personally, I've been stressed lately thinking about everything that's going on in the news. When we keep these stressors bottled up, it can start to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. I've personally benefited from therapy in my own life. I talk about it a lot on the show. I wrote a whole book about it. And I found that it's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/M54 today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/M54.
Let's face it, after a night with drinks, I don't bounce back the way I used to. I have to make a choice. I can either have a great night or a great next day. That is until I found ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's that byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break that byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. So when I ring in the new year this past year, I drank ZBiotics that night, and I have never felt better than that next morning. And every time I've drank since, I take ZBiotics. And honestly, I wish they had this kind of stuff when I was in college, when I used to drink a lot more, but at least we have it now. So go to zbiotics.com/majority54 to get 15% off your first order when you use majority54 at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So remember to head to zbiotics.com/majority54 and use the code majority54 at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and for the good times. All right. Well, over to the Hunter Biden trial. It's an interesting fact that I just saw reported by the BBC is that there's a pool of 64 jurors. Over 24 of them answered to a sort of screening question that they had a family member who struggled with substance abuse. And basically, a lot of those people are going to be dismissed because I guess they'll be sympathetic to Hunter Biden. I think it's just a sense of the toll of the opioid epidemic and alcoholism and other substance abuse issues in this country. The second notable thing here on a more political side of things is that there's some reporting that Trump's team has started to become relatively quiet on this trial. And I'm wondering what you make of that.
It's curious. I mean, my guess is it's too close to the verdicts in his trial, in which, one of their major narratives is this idea of, a weaponization of the justice system to prosecute, to levy political prosecutions of Republicans, right? And so, pointing out or lifting up the idea that the DOJ, Biden's DOJ, is prosecuting his own son would certainly undermine their defense of Trump. So I think it's probably very tactical and less strategic. I think if there's a verdict here, they'll jump right back on it and really drive it home. So that's my guess. I don't know, but I'm not entirely sure what they're thinking.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how Biden handles a verdict if it comes against Hunter. 'Cause the thing that's interesting is, if there's a not guilty verdict, you know what they're going to say. It was stacked, yada, 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 which is like, how do you stack a jury? Honestly, I don't know. But because if the prosecutors brought charges, that's all the Justice Department essentially can do, right? Like, and do the best they can to prosecute Hunter. You got to imagine like the sort of differences between how Biden handles this and Trump handles his own case will be notable to astute observers, which is Biden's fairly subdued. He did have certain pointed words to say about certain things about this case, but by and large has been pretty hands off about it. And my prediction is Trump, whatever's going on here in terms of message discipline from the Trump campaign, they're not going to be able to contain Trump. So like in any world, whether there's a guilty verdict, he'll crow about that and talk about the, criminal, like the sort of Biden crime family, and that they now need to look at, Joe Biden and Biden's brother, et cetera. And if there's not guilty, he'll say that this is some kind of like, purposeful loss by the Justice Department and an example about how the system's stacked against him.
Yeah. I think that, yes, that he'll do that no matter what. I think that is not going to move anybody ultimately, right? Like,
yeah, agreed.
What was encouraging coming out of the trial in New York was that voters, at least in the initial polling, voters found that the jury acted fairly and correctly, right? Like they trusted the jury. And so they weren't moved by Trump's arguments. And, the arguments for Trump in that case would be, somewhat stronger because it's this Manhattan jury and, the judge and whatever. Like, and they still were like, no, 12 ordinary people rendered this verdict after careful consideration and we trust them. And it was pretty, it wasn't close. Like, it was a strong majority in each of those cases. Especially amongst independent voters, especially amongst what some people are calling double haters, which are people who really don't love Trump but also don't love Biden. But they said, like, this was fair, and it moved them a little bit, right? But Trump's arguments that the thing was stacked and all the stuff that he was going to say, what he will probably say about whatever the verdict is in the Hunter case, like, didn't move anybody. So. In some ways it's not persuasive, and in some ways it's just like stuff that part of the reason it's not persuasive is like we've heard it so many times from him before, that it's almost white noise. But really, like, I think there is a fundamental respect for the jury amongst the American public, especially voters who can be moved, which is an increasingly small percentage of the overall electorate. But I'm just not sure how effective that would be for Trump.
The irony here is, there are issues with the New York case. I've talked about them on this podcast before. But what is absolutely clear, beyond a reasonable doubt, is that Hunter Biden would not be facing a trial if he were Hunter Smith.
Oh, yeah.
This is not the kind of thing. He tried to plead guilty. He tried to do, these cases always plea out. There's always a deal. This is not the kind of case they would bring. All the things they say about the Bragg case are true 5x on this one. And I am sure Hunter Biden has been trying to plead guilty and get some kind of deal, any reasonable deal leading up to this. Yeah. But he's getting special treatment, That's the irony of this.
It is. And I think, it's a weird charge. Like the gun charge is so bizarre. But again, like my guess is like it's not unheard of. Pulling the plea deal seemed pretty unprecedented.
That was straight pressure.
Yeah, 100% straight pressure. And so, with a Trump appointed judge and the whole thing. But now that it's going to a jury, like, we'll see. Like, I mean, it will be interesting to see what his argument. Like, one of the big failures of the Trump defense team, I think, is like they employed a political strategy and not a legal strategy in that case, right? They were not arguing to this jury. They kept saying that he didn't do it, rather than just trying to sow doubt and flip a juror. I don't know what the Hunter team is going to do. My guess is not that. Like he already was ready to plead guilty to this, right? And the gun charge, especially, which is like there's paperwork on it. So my guess is the arguments will be a little bit more legalistic in nature. And they'll try to flip one of those jurors. And, perhaps they raise the specter of this being a political prosecution. My guess is that they do not in the case.
Right. Well, okay, we are out of time. Everybody who's out there, I dropped a link in the show notes. We're going to drop a link in the show notes and probably on YouTube somewhere. To the Killing Justice podcast. Check that out. Leave a 5-star review for the Majority 54 podcast. Hari, where do we find your work?
On this podcast. This is my best work.
You're on X, though, aren't you? Should we follow you?
I'm on X at Hari Sevugan. Yeah.
At Hari Sevugan. X. I'm starting to say it now. The rebranding has finally worked.
I can't.
Well, thank you, everybody. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.